the first thing that we're going to do when we want to graph one period of a sine or cosine graph is analyze our graph a little bit. What I mean by that is let's find a few things out about it. We're going to find out the two things we took a look at in the last video if you watched that one. First, I want to know the amplitude. The amplitude is the coefficient. So I'm going to know that my graph has an amplitude of 4, meaning a high point of 4 and a low point of -4 on my graph. Next up, I'll also want to know what the period of the graph is. Recall that to find the period, take 2 pi, which is the normal period of a sine or cosine graph, and divide it by the b value, which is the coefficient of x. When I do that, and if you're not good with a calculator or with fractions, then use a calculator, my period turns out to be 3 pi in this case, so the period's been extended a little bit. So now to actually make my graph, there's a few different ways to do this. I'm going to show you the method that I like. The method that I like is going to involve adjusting the scale of our graph. Doing this, I'm going to see the points that I want to see on the graph, so I know you know what's going on. However, every graph is going to look the same. It's only the scale that's going to be changing. So some people don't like it because of that. They can't tell what's the same and what's different as I stretch and compress and change the period and amplitude of these graphs. But anyway, it's the method that I like, so it's the method that I'm going to use. So I'm going to start with a graph like this. I'm going to include 0 for my origin. First up, I'm going to include my y-axis numbers. Those would be my amplitudes. So my graph hits a high point of 4 and it hits a low point of -4. All of these numbers are going to be mandatory to show up on your graph so that I know you know what's going on. Next up, I'm going to do the x-axis scale. There's going to be 5 numbers on this. I have 1, that's at 0. I'm going to have a number here at the end that's going to be where the period ends, so 3 pi. In between there, I'm going to want to know the halfway points. And then I'm going to want to know half of the halfway points, or the quarter points. So some people are really good at finding these numbers in their head. Otherwise, I'll give you a quick trick for how to find them. The halfway point, just take your period, which is 3 pi, and multiply that by a half. That turns out to be 3 pi over 2. Some of you knew that without having to do that. To find the first half of a halfway point, or the quarter point, multiply your period by a quarter. So 3 pi times a fourth comes out to be 3 pi over 4. All of these 5 numbers are numbers I'm going to want to see on the graph, the numbers in red and the 0. And then to find this point, well, if I've gone a quarter and a half, I want to know the 3/4 point. So once again, take your full period, which is 3 pi, and multiply that by 3/4. That comes out to be 9 pi over 4. So I've divided my graph up into 5 points, I suppose. The final part of this is then going to be to make our sine wave. So I noticed that this was a sine wave. Recall that sine begins from the origin. So I'm going to put my first point right there at the origin, and it goes up from there. So I'm going to kind of get to my first tick mark, which is at 3 pi over 4, and now my graph is at the amplitude. I'm going to move along to my next tick mark, and my graph is back down to the midline, the x-axis. At the next stop, I'm way down at the low point of my amplitude, so right down there. And then finally, I end up right back where I started. So using those 5 points as best I can, and let's see how good I can do this on my iPad here. You want to make that smooth sine wave that goes through those points just like so. And you may want to kind of extend it and keep it going, because remember, these waves go on forever and ever and ever. So there's one period using all the key information. Again, all these graphs are going to look the same. Every sine wave that you graph with this method will look identical. The way that we know they're different is because we see these values on your x-axis and on your y-axis. Okay, let's go ahead and try a cosine wave as well, although it's going to follow much of the same advice. So I'm going to begin graphing my cosine wave by analyzing it. So I'm going to want to know 2 things, the amplitude and the period. The amplitude is just your a value, so my amplitude is 1/2 in this problem. My period is going to be adjusted by what the b value is. The b value itself is not the period, but it helps you find it. To find the period of a cosine graph, it's the same as a sine graph. The normal period is 2 pi, and divide that by your b value. In this case, I end up with a period of 1. So my period is shorter than what it would normally be. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at how I'll graph this. Again, there's different ways to do it. I'm showing you the method that I like to use. If you do it a different way, then fine, but if you're in my class, probably do it this way. I'm going to include first the 0. That's going to be my first key point. Then let's include our y-axis numbers. That's the amplitude. It's going to hit a high point of 1/2, and it's going to hit a low point of -1/2. Remember what I said? Every graph's going to look the same. Every cosine wave will look the same. Every sine wave will look the same using my method. So what I want to see are all these different tick marks, so I know you know what's going on. And even though they look the same, we know the scales are different. So I need 5 points along my x-axis. I'm going to start with 0, that's where the graph will start from, and then end at 1, because that's my normal period length. I'll need the halfway point, and then I'll need half of the halfway points as well. So halfway between 0 and 1 is 1/2. Remember, if you need help finding these numbers, here's a little trick I use. To find that middle number, just take the period times a half. Well, 1 times a half is a half. This is going to be a quarter. Some of you know that. Otherwise, take your period and multiply it by a quarter. And I'm hoping, again, many of you know this, but that point's going to be 3/4. 1 times 3/4 is just 3/4. But this is kind of a little trick you can use. Take your period times those values to find all of those points. All right, then finally what I'll do is I'll graph my cosine wave, recalling what a cosine wave looks like. So cosine waves begin from the amplitude. So at 0 on the x-axis, my graph starts from up there at 1/2. At the first pit stop there at 1/4, I'm now at the midline. Don't forget that point. Some people skip over it. At the next pit stop, I'm way low. I'm at the low point of my graph. At the next pit stop, I'm back to the midline, and then finally I end back where I start, because remember, these graphs repeat forever and ever. So once again, as best you can, make that nice smooth cosine wave that goes through those points. You may want to extend it to kind of remind yourself that it keeps on going up and down forever and ever. But there, in my opinion, is a very beautiful cosine wave, at least one period of that cosine wave.